What's going on, family? It's your boy Brandon. We back here with another video. And today I got a pretty good topic for you guys, something that's been on my mind pretty heavily this past weekend. Um, I think this weekend has just been very eye-opening for me, for many reasons. But today, what I want to talk to you guys about is weakness, right? Weakness is something that we've all felt in our lives at one point or another. And, if you're a guy, society tells you that you're never supposed to feel weak. You're never supposed to be seen as weak. You're supposed to be strong, masculine, and all these things, which to an extent is true. But there's a certain understanding that we have to have, which we're going to get into later. But, if you're a woman, sometimes, it's okay to be seen as weak. Some women are very hard on themselves when it comes to this concept of weakness, but it's generally more okay for women to be seen as weaker than men, both physically and I guess emotionally. But that's neither here nor there. This lesson should apply to everybody. um but like I said before, everybody has experienced weakness at some point in their lives, whether that being physically weak, or you're spiritually weak, or you're emotionally weak, to the point to where you've either made certain mistakes in your past because of weaknesses from lust, or weaknesses from maybe just not being able to carry certain things, carry certain emotions, carry your own emotions. um, you know and I want to change how we think about it, because in my mind, the way I look at it, weakness isn't necessarily a hindrance. In fact, I think it's one of the most powerful forces in the world. Weakness exposes who you really are deep down inside. It exposes that part of yourself that you try to hide, right? And this is talking about, like, maybe from a personal level, like all those things you keep on the inside, but it can also be the gateway to real strength. Weakness opens the door for you to become the best version of yourself, right? It is the catalyst for real strength to form and develop. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to get into what weakness is, where it originates from, and how to defeat weakness um, by understanding it. And then we're going to talk about a couple of biblical examples of weakness so that we can kind of set our mind straight on it. But yeah, I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. Should be a good one for you all. So with that, let's get right into it. Now, as I stated earlier, weakness is one of the most important and powerful forces in the world. And one of the most important facets of weakness is that it goes hand in hand with temptation. And if you watched my video last week about accountability, you know that I talked about Adam and Eve. And the reason that that story of Adam and Eve is so incredibly powerful, and it's used in so many different examples for so many things, is because it can apply to so many different things, right? So, in the same way that I use that story to talk about how they fell into temptation, and Adam and Eve kind of lacked accountability, I'm going to talk about that same story from the context of what temptation and weakness really is. So, weakness and temptation both stem from lack. They both stem from feelings of lack. When you feel weak, it is because deep down inside, you understand that you are lacking something. If you're physically, and this doesn't apply to every scenario is a case by case thing. There are children or people who are really sick and they can't do anything about it. But in most cases, weakness is something that you can change and you can adjust and you can fix. And you just have to figure out what it is that you lack, right? If you're physically weak, you lack strength. You lack physical strength. You need to go into the gym. If you're emotionally weak, you probably need to go to therapy. You probably need to talk to somebody, talk to a professional, so that you don't act out and you can gain control of your emotions. This is where discipline comes in and discernment comes in. If you're spiritually weak, you probably need to go to church. You need to read your Bible. You need to go, get in tune with God so that you can, like, get your life together and understand and gain true wisdom so that you won't go out and make some of the same mistakes that you did in the past. But as the same thing is true with weakness, the temptation also stems from lack. And like I said, these two go hand in hand. When you are tempted, it's because you see something that you're lacking, and you desperately want it, right? There's a part of you that wants whatever it is that you feel tempted to get. And I mean, if it wasn't important to you, right, then there would be no reason for you to feel tempted to eat it. Like, I have a big sweet tooth. Sometimes when I'm on my fast and or I'm trying to make sure I eat right while I'm, in the gym or whatever, you know, sometimes I see those sweets and I get tempted, right? Because I love sweets. But if you don't have a sweet tooth and you don't like sweets, then that's not going to be something that you get tempted by. It's going to be easy for you to ignore it because it's not something that you feel that you lack. So, in that same vein, we're going to talk about Adam and Eve and get into it, right? So, when Adam and Eve were sitting on that tree and the serpent came up and wanted to tell them, like, oh, hey, if you eat this fruit, you're going to be like God, knowing good and evil. And that's why God doesn't want you to eat this fruit. When the serpent told Adam and Eve this, Adam and Eve realized that there was something deep inside of them that they were lacking. And that was to be in the same totality as God, to be knowing good and evil. And they realized because they were created by God, they would never be in that totality. So they ate the fruit in order to gain what it was that they lacked. So when they fell into temptation, they acted out of weakness. That's why I say these two things go hand in hand, right? Temptation cannot be realized without some form of weakness. And in order for you to overcome that weakness, you have to do certain things. And one of those things that you have to do is you have to look inside of yourself and understand what it is that you're desiring or you feel like you're lacking that's making you weak, that's making you fall into the temptation in the first place, right? If this desire that you have to or this desire to have whatever it is that you want is stronger than your desire to get to know God, then it's a good chance that you're going to be falling into temptation. If you can put your desire to know God and to understand God and gain wisdom from God ahead of the things that you feel like you desire from a carnal standpoint, then it'll become very easy for you to resist the temptations and even and not be weak in the flesh. So, the most important thing that you can do when you're feeling weak is to acknowledge it. Acknowledging your weaknesses is the first step to overcoming them. When you can acknowledge it, right, you can come to the point of understanding the reasons why you feel weak. Maybe you feel weak because you're physically weak, right? Like I said, if you're physically weak, go to the gym unless you're got some type of, sickness or something like that. Maybe you're spiritually weak. Maybe you find yourselves in the same old cycles, the same old life patterns to where you keep making the same mistakes. In that case, you're spiritually and emotionally weak. You need to acknowledge it. You need to understand that, right? If you told yourself you're not going to be doing all these same old habits, all living with those same vices that you're doing, or fornicating or whatever the case may be, but you still keep doing it, that's spiritual weakness. Maybe you feel like people don't see you the way that you want to be seen. Maybe you suffer from abandonment and it makes you feel weak on the inside. It makes you, want to do things to fill those voids of weakness that exist inside of you. You have to acknowledge those things because only then will you gain the true tools in order to fix it. You have to understand why it is that you're feeling the way that you're feeling so that you can move on, right? The second thing that you need to do is take it to God. You have to go to God with humility. When you go to God, if you're prideful in asking God to help you out through a problem that you have, he's not going to help you. It's just you're not going to be able to hear his voice and submit yourself to his will so that you can receive the tools that will help you be the better person that you're trying to be. Many times we go to God in this state of pride because we don't want to accept the answer that He has for us. We have all these plans and desires for our own lives, but when it comes to, what God has for us, sometimes it's completely different from the things that we feel like we want for ourselves. But true fulfillment in life can only come if you understand what it is that your true purpose in life is supposed to be. All these other things can come to you if you just submit yourself to the plan. And submission is just a small tangent. It's coming underneath the work. Sub, to come under, mission is the work, right? It's not Submission is not in and of itself a state of weakness. It is not to be weak. It is to come under the work that is already prepared for you, the work that is supposed to be yours, right? When you submit, there is work that is given to you that you have to take on, a mission that you have in order that you have to act. And you can only do that when you submit yourself to it. It's the same thing as working a job. Call it what you will, but when you sign that paper to work for a job, you're submitting yourself to that company in order to do the work that they're giving you, right? It's the same thing that you have to do when you're submitting yourself to God. God gives you work when you submit to him so that you can do it. Submission is not a weakness, and that's more so a message for the women, especially. Um, but that was just a small tangent. So when you go to God, go to him with humility and submit yourself so that you can understand your weaknesses, and you can understand, outside of the things that you can change on your own, you can understand the tools that you need in order to break free from that weakness, because real strength is built through first having been weak. And I felt that this message was so important to me this weekend because I realized that I'm still weak. I have a lot of weaknesses that I have to deal with on the inside that I haven't really, that I thought I overcame. I thought I submitted them, but they're still there. And that's the thing. It's like even when you receive the tools and you do some kind of work to kind of overcome that, it doesn't just go away overnight. There still has to be work to be done. There's still work to be done after you receive the tools and after you submit, right? Especially if you're new to the journey. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to slip up, but that's what the grace is for, right? When you're weak, do the work to become strong. Don't give up on yourself just because you made one mistake. Don't be so hard on yourself. Understand the mistake that you made and do the work to clean it up so that it doesn't happen again. When you go to God with humility and you have this repentant heart about yourself, you can overcome literally anything. So, we're going to get into a little bit of biblical context here. So, the first passage I want to talk about is Daniel chapter 10. And if you've ever read the book of Daniel, you know this is where Daniel is doing his fast. And if you've ever done a Daniel fast or you know anything about the Daniel fast, it's typically a 21-day fast where you cut out any kind of animal products. You're eating like plants. It's almost like a vegetarian diet. Like when I did mine, I was eating like lentil. I made lentil soup and I was eating that and just drinking water. You can eat like nuts, salads, things like that. So you would typically do it for 21 days. I've never done it that long, but during this passage in Daniel chapter 10, he's coming up on the end of his fast. It was like the 21st day, I believe, and a messenger from God came to him. And Daniel is already in this weakened state, right? He's been fasting and denying his flesh for 21 days, right? And if you ever done that before, you probably know that you probably feel weak by the end of it. So when the messenger came, Daniel, he was afraid, of course, obviously, because this being was like cloaked in light and like had like eyes like lightning and like head of fire or whatever it said. Um, and when the messenger came, like Daniel, he was so weak he couldn't even stand anymore. He fell on the ground, and the messenger reached out and touched him and revitalized his strength. Daniel acknowledged that he was weak in front of the messenger, and he touched him and revitalized his strength. So when Daniel got up, the messenger told him, why he was there. And for context, prior Daniel was fasting because the around this time, uh, the Israelites were in captivity in Babylon, and they had just gotten released, and they were allowed to go back to Jerusalem, but Jerusalem was still destroyed, and Daniel was in charge of having to rebuild, rebuild the city or the walls and things like that. But he was distraught because of the state of his people. Not everybody wanted to go back to Jerusalem, and so he was asking God what to do. And so part of his asking was humbling himself and fasting and weakening his flesh so that he can hear from God. And so when the messenger came 21 days later, The messenger told him, hey, from the very first day that you asked God to give you the answer to the problem that you had, he sent that answer. But there was spiritual warfare happening. There was a battle happening in the cosmic realm and the spiritual realm between this messenger and God's forces and the enemy's forces that delayed the message from getting there. And so the messenger told him he came to him to deliver some kind of future prophecy. But all that I wanted to say, the point that I want to get out of that is that sometimes, well, is that God will impart upon you the answer to the problem that you have from the first day that you ask it. But sometimes it can be delayed, right? Sometimes it can be delayed because of forces out of your control, or sometimes it can be delayed because of forces in your control. If you refuse to go to him in from a state of humility, then your answer will most likely be delayed. If you do things that are against his will for you, your answer may be delayed. You have to come to him with humility and have yourself in a posture ready to hear from him in order to hear from him. Only then will you receive the tools necessary in order to overcome whatever weaknesses that you have. Daniel had weaknesses. He had weaknesses as a leader in not really knowing what to do with the people that he was expected to lead, right? But God gave him the tools necessary in order to have the confidence to lead, but it came at a delay. And obviously, in this part, it wasn't Daniel's fault, but it can be your fault if you choose not to humble yourself, if you choose to live through pride and not listen to the voice of God. So, the next chapter or passage that I wanted to get into is James chapter 4. I really like this one because it talks about, it talks about lack, which is what we related to from weakness and temptation earlier on and how they stem from lack. It talks about the important context as to why you should humble yourself before God. And in verse 2, it says that fights and quarrels come from lack, and you lack because you don't go to God with humility, right? If you go to God with humility, he will bless you. God, he does not bless you because he knows that deep within your heart, you're going to use whatever gifts he decides to impart in you or whatever tools that he decides to impart in you to satisfy your selfish desires that you keep deep within your flesh. And honestly, like I had to learn that lesson the hard way. I'm still learning that lesson, and it's been something that has been on my mind very recently. And I'm working to overcome it. Um, it's not easy. The receiving the tools, hearing from God, and applying them isn't always easy, but you have to work through them and understand that humility is what's necessary in order to become the best version of yourself. And later on in that chapter, it talks about how God resists the proud, but draws close to the humble. And that should be around like verse 13 or something like that. I don't have it in front of me, but that that right there is telling you exactly what you need to do, right? Whenever you get tempted and you feel weak within your body or your spirit, it's most of the time it's stemming from something that you feel like you are lacking. And so when you resist the temptation of the enemy and you draw closer to God, that lack can be replaced with strength. And oftentimes, strength is found in purpose and in fulfillment. And all these things can be found when you seek God's kingdom first and his righteousness. That's Matthew 6:33. So when you humble yourself before God, he will lift you up. So with that being said, family, hopefully, you enjoyed this video. It's a little bit of a shorter one today, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys that message because it had been weighing on my heart very recently. As I stated before, like it ain't easy. I'm very new to this whole journey, but I want to kind of impart the wisdom that I'm gaining along the way. And wisdom, it comes from doing hard things. It comes from, making mistakes. It comes from living, having life experience. So whatever it is that you do, reflect on it. Every failure is an opportunity to learn something new and grow from. So, with that said, family, I'll leave you guys to it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, share with somebody who needs it. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the good things. And remember to stay blessed.